So, welcome back to another episode of Reboot. And firstly, my apologies for pushing this video live a little bit later than is become normal. I took a little bit of time this week to reflect on a documentary that I saw online about Ghost Mountain and how often a lack of understanding can fuel division between people. It's fantastic news that there's a ceasefire in place at the border, and I really hope that all of that works out. And yeah, so I'd enjoy reading and thinking about your comments in the comments box below. Otherwise, I will see you on the next one. Thank you. So this channel has never been about anything other than the quiet, positive, hopeful side of life. It's been about the small things, the moments that hold meaning if you slow down long enough to feel them. About seeing people as people, places as more than postcards, and stories as bridges, not barriers. So I apologise in advance because this video may sound a little different. Because this week I watched something that shook me to my very core, and it's taken me days to get over. It was a documentary called Ghost Mountain, the Second Killing Fields, about the Cambodians who fled the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s, only to be pushed back, but at the Thai border, down a literal mountain. And I've heard stories before, but this one, it broke something open. It wasn't just the footage or the interviews, it was what they chose to focus on. Not just the cruelty, the bureaucracy, the silence of the world, but also the spirit of those who survived, the quiet dignity of people who had already lost everything and still walked forward. And I found myself crying, not just for what was lost, but for what has been rebuilt. Because somehow, and this defies all logic, Cambodia today is not a country of bitterness. It would have every right to be, and yet it isn't. There's a quote from the documentary that stayed with me. It was said by a nurse, one of the rescuers, the unsung heroes who ran these refugee camps with barely any resources. She said, "When you think you're having a bad day, think about the refugees on that mountain." I don't think it was said to make anyone feel guilty. It was said with the soft authority of someone who had been there. Someone who held starving children, who watched families shattered by war, trying to carry the last of their belongings in baskets in their arms on their backs. As you know, I live in Cambodia now, not as a historian, not as a journalist, just as a person. And that quote has reframed so many things for me. Because I too have my moments. I get frustrated, impatient, overwhelmed by small things, a missed deadline, an annoying email, a bad day at work. But then I walk outside and I see a tuk-tuk driver wave at his son as he heads off for another 12-hour shift. I see an old woman sweep the front of her shop with care, humming to herself, still showing up each morning despite a history too heavy to name. I sit with friends and realise they carry legacies I can't imagine, and yet they laugh, they love, they live. How do you rebuild after that, and how do you still remain kind? And that's the part I don't think we talk enough about, the strength that it takes not to harden, not to carry your hatred in your bones, to choose joy after all of that. And maybe that's what we're meant to learn, that the lessons of Ghost Mountain is not just a historical one, it's a personal one. How we carry our own pain, how we show up despite it, and how we choose to walk through the world. This channel was never about anger. It was never about division. It's always been about something else entirely: connection, understanding, light, self-development and growth. But some days you see things that make it impossible to stay silent. Some days, even when your intention is hope, you feel grief or even rage leak through the cracks. And after watching Ghost Mountain, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I opened the comments section, not of the film itself, but of another video. I think the video was a quiet reflection on Cambodia's spirit, resilience and its past, and there it was. Mockery, spitefulness, the kind of smug sarcasm that only comes from deep disconnection. People laughing at the pain, making light of genocide, writing off an entire people because of something they've read in the headlines, or worse, because of a stereotype. And I just sat there feeling sick. Because I just come from watching a story of a mother who carried her child down a cliff with no food for days. I'd just seen the face of a boy, now a man, weeping as he retraced the trail, where so many refugees were lost. And I'd just been reminded of what this country had endured, and then the coldness of a comments box. People who had never been here, never stood in this red earth, never sat in the quiet shade of a Phnom Penh afternoon or looked into the eyes of a generation that carries scars so deeply they don't even speak of them anymore. One nurse in the documentary said something that's haunted me since I watched the video. She said, "When you think you're having a bad day, think about the refugees on that mountain." She wasn't saying our problems don't matter. She was saying your life or my life is easy. She was saying perspective, empathy, humility. Because once you play the movie, once you look through the eyes of a Cambodian woman in 1979 who had already lost everything to the Khmer Rouge and still had to walk down a cliff into more uncertainty, once you feel that, how can you joke about it? How can you write comments dripping in sarcasm and arrogance? How can you carry so much cruelty in your tone when all that's ever been asked of you is to listen? There's this thing that happens online where we forget the words we type are read by real people, where suffering becomes entertainment, where mockery becomes a reflex. But believe me, no, I know that if those same people spent one day in Cambodia, something would change. If they sat with an elder in the countryside, if they visited a school and looked into the eyes of a student whose grandparents survived something that textbooks barely mention anymore, if they felt the quiet dignity of this land, the grace that lives in silence, they wouldn't mock. They couldn't. Cambodia does not wear its pain like a badge. It wears it like a thread woven into its art, its music, its hospitality. You don't see it unless you slow down, unless you care enough to look. And still, after all of that, Cambodia chooses hope. It chooses to smile at strangers, to welcome people with open arms, even when so many turn their backs in its darkest hours. And that's why this video is a homage, not just to the tragedy, but to the transcendence, to the fact that people of this country carry history, but they don't let that define them. They carry memory, but they choose hope over hate. And if you think that's weak, if you think that forgiveness is foolish, if you think that kindness is naive, then you've never known real strength, because it comes from a kind of grace that doesn't come from forgetting, it comes from surviving. So this video is for them, the survivors, the children of survivors, for the strangers who smile at me in the street, for the people who don't need to speak of pain to prove they've overcome it. And this is my way of saying thank you, and I'm sorry. Sorry that the world wasn't kinder, sorry that some people still aren't. But most of all, thank you for showing me what it means to live with history and still choose to be soft. Because when you think you're having a bad day, think about the refugees on that mountain and then choose to be kind.